Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we have a review video on the Pat McGrath Labs Skin Fetish Sublime Perfection Foundation. I do have it on today, but I do show you guys a quick demo of how it applies on the skin, and I give you some details in the end of my experience with this foundation. So if you're interested in seeing what I have to say about this, then please keep watching the video. I don't have any face makeup on at the moment. I only have some moisturizer on from the morning because it's pretty early today. So I only have moisturizer on. Typically when I do my makeup, I put moisturizer on before my makeup anyways. So this is a pretty accurate representation of what I do, but I just wanted to come on first without any foundation just so you guys can see an accurate demonstration of the product and how it performs in real time. So I do want to start off by talking a little bit about my skin type. So I do have pretty normal skin. I can tend to get a little bit oily around the sides of my nose and a little bit in between my eyebrows, but it's not something that really bothers me that much. I usually just maybe pat it out with a little bit of powder and I'm good to go. It's not something that bothers me a whole lot if I get oils. I actually really like the appearance of a dewy skin. I personally like kind of like more satin more on the dewy side. I don't like to look super oily, but I also don't like to look extremely matte. I would rather be oily or glowy than be on the matte side. So I typically go for more satin to glowy types of foundations. I'm okay with a satin, but I do tend to lean towards a more glowy looking foundation. And the products that I apply on my skin tend to be a little bit more glowy. I feel like those kinds of products just sit a little bit nicer on my skin. So I am pretty normal. I can get oily in some areas. My skin has gone changing as I've gotten a little bit older. I used to have very oily skin, but now I have pretty normal combination skin sometimes. It can actually get dry in some areas depending on the weather, but right now it's pretty normal. And it's actually been, we're in the summer months, and I've noticed that my skin is still maintained its normal appearance. So that's the first thing I want to point out, because you have to keep in mind your skin type when you purchase foundations. So my skin's pretty normal. I do not have a lot of texture on my skin. I don't have fine lines or wrinkles. I do have a little bit of texture from previous acne, maybe like around here, just a little bit of kind of like bumps, and I do have a current breakout here, but it's pretty flush with the skin right now. It's not really that raised, maybe just slightly. But as far as wrinkles, I don't have any wrinkles. I'm pretty young and I try to take care of that. So I don't have any wrinkles. That's something important to keep in mind as well when you purchasing a foundation, is how it's going to interact with your skin texture. If you have raised acne or if you have fine lines and wrinkles. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm going to just let you know that I don't have that concern. So it's not something that I really look for or care about in a foundation. But even then, I'm still gonna show you how this performs on my skin type. Just keep in mind my skin type and see if it correlates to yours. Even though I have tried out this foundation on a few other different skin types, because I wanted to give you guys a representation and kind of get more intel on the kind of foundation that this is. So I did take it with me in my professional kit, and I used it on several different types of skin concerns and skin types and skin textures. So I do have a clear view of what I want to say about this foundation, but I did want to show you how it performs on my skin as well. So I'm gonna put my hair back. My skin type, I did notice that this foundation doesn't require much priming for me. I usually just put on a moisturizer, and I kind of like that to bring out the glow in this foundation. It can really easily go either way depending on the priming that you do, which is kind of typical for all foundations, but that's something that you kind of get experience with as you go playing with different kinds of primers and makeups. So that's something that I know to be the baseline. So depending on how you want your foundation to look is kind of how you will prime the skin. I personally like to make this foundation come out extremely dewy. So I just have my moisturizer and I'm going to apply a little bit of Fix Plus. I find that this foundation performs really well when you have very hydrated skin. So right now my skin is pretty damp from the Fix Plus, and this performs excellent when you have that really damp base. It kind of is like a water-based foundation, so it sticks to water-based primers extremely beautifully. When I first used this foundation, I was really surprised by the formula. I was not expecting this kind of very liquidy formula, and I'll just show you guys what I mean when I squirt it onto my palette here. So you'll see that's just one squirt and it's extremely runny. You see how it's running down my palette? It's an extremely light, liquid, watery based formula. So it's that kind of runny formula. It's not a very thick formula. And so I'm gonna use it with my IT Cosmetics buffing brush, and I'm gonna show you guys just kind of how it performs when I first apply it. So at first when I used this foundation, when I first purchased it, I kind of was unsure if I liked it. I was leaning more towards hating it at first, just because I was thrown off by that kind of consistency. And I'll explain to you in further detail why in a little bit, but I can't think and do my foundation at the same time. So one thing that I do really like about the consistency of the foundation is that it blends out extremely nice when you use this kind of brush. So I will also mention, you know, the kinds of brushes that I use and things like that in a little bit later. But so far I found that this foundation type of brush is my favorite for the consistency of this foundation. So I did use one squirt and I still have a tiny bit left. It's not, since it is a more watery consistency, it's not one that's going to it's not one of those that a little bit's gonna go a long way. You do have to use a decent amount of foundation, which is fine. It's not one that's like, you know, since it has that type of formula, I would expect that from this foundation, that it's not gonna, you know, spread across a ton with just one squirt. And you can see here already the difference. An even tone here. This is the without foundation, and this is with foundation. So you can already see that it's evening out my skin tone. So I'm gonna go in with a second pump just for the other side of my face. Also, the pump doesn't really disperse a lot of product, so it's kind of, you know, expected that you have to do a few pumps to do your whole face. The pump is kind of like regulating a lot of the product, so that's kind of good, because that way I'd rather, you know, have to use more pumps than a waste foundation, in my opinion. So that's not really a deal breaker for me. I know some people like that foundations a little bit goes a long way, but for me personally, since I use foundations often, I like that, you know, I would rather use more pumps than have too much on my palette with just one pump and have to throw it out and waste product. So I'm totally fine with that fact. The foundation looks like with just one layer on the skin. It is pretty nice. I'm not sure if it's coming out on camera, but in person, it looks really nice and even. I feel like this is kind of like a medium to light finish right now, coverage, because it's kind of like you give, like, this foundation at first gives you a really light coverage. But one thing that I do love about this foundation that I've experienced is that you can build it up so easily, and I'll show you guys, because I want to build it up just slightly in some areas to cover up a little bit more of some acne. So I'm going to show you guys how it builds. I'm going to do one more squirt. And I'm just going to build it up in any areas that I feel like it needs more coverage. But I just want to show you guys how nice this layers. That's one thing that I really loved about this foundation, is that it layers on so nicely. As the more you work it into the skin, the better it looks. So if there's any areas that you see that you don't like how it's looking a little bit cakey, it's looking a little bit patchy, work it in some more. It's kind of tricky because I want to say that it's easy for beginners, but I don't necessarily feel that way exactly. I'm kind of torn in that sense. I want to say that it's easy for beginners, but part of me doesn't really believe that 100%, and I will go into more detail as far as that in a little bit as well. So this is a second light layer, and I'm already noticing more of a medium coverage here, and I am perfectly happy with leaving it like this, to be completely honest with you. It's a really nice coverage right now. One thing that I really love about this foundation is that it is so undetectable on the skin. It does not look heavy. Even though I've just layered on a second layer of product, it doesn't look heavy whatsoever. This looks like your skin, which is why I think that this foundation would be great if you have more textured skin, as far as maybe wrinkles and fine lines, because it doesn't emphasize texture. It kind of just sits like skin. That's why I say, on me, I don't feel like I need primer with this foundation, because the foundation sits perfectly beautiful on its own. I don't notice any emphasizing of my pores or fine lines. I do notice one thing with this foundation is that it can settle into my frown line here, which doesn't always happen with me with more satin type foundations, but since this one is a more liquid base, that does tend to happen to me. If you can see from my expressions, it kind of starts to settle there, but that doesn't really bother me as much. That I kind of just buff it out a little bit, and then I will set it with powder and I won't even notice that anymore. So that does tend to happen. I wanted to point that out as well, that if you do lots of expressions here, it can possibly settle in there, but it's not horrible. It doesn't look terrible. It's just slightly settling based on the condition of the foundation. So I don't have any other product on other than the primer and the foundation. You can see it gives a really nice subtle glow to the skin. So I like to build on that glow when I use this foundation. So with the other products that I'll use, I will build on the glow, but I like that the foundation itself gives you a really nice subtle glow. It's not overly matte, it's not overly dewy. If you can see when the light hits, it's just a really nice subtle type of glow, which is more kind of like a natural skin texture, which is why I say that this foundation sits like skin, because the finish that it has, it just kind of looks like a natural skin glow. It doesn't look like an artificial skin glow, if you know what I mean, like a highlighter type of skin glow. It's just kind of like, it's pretty. I like how I like the finish of it. That's what I want to get to. I like the finish of it, and I like how I can build it up so easily. So that way you can either use this with a light hand to have a really light coverage, or you can build it up to have a more full coverage, and it builds up beautifully. Some foundations will tend to get extremely matte or extremely cakey when you try to build it up, or it'll pill up and start kind of like getting little balls. That doesn't happen with this foundation. I actually think that the more you build it up, the more beautiful it looks. It's just, so I'm going to continue the rest of my makeup, and then I will also just talk a little bit more about the foundation, but I will be right back when I finish the rest of my face. Hey guys, so I'm back, and so I just wanted to give you some more details with a full face on. The products do layer on top very nicely, you know, any powder products and things like that. One thing that I really like about this foundation is how even it looks. It does not look patchy, it does not look streaky, it looks even, which I really love that about this foundation, is just that it gives you a really nice even canvas. When I first purchased it, I did look up reviews on YouTube to see what other people were saying, And I was surprised that the top video that I had seen was someone that absolutely hated this foundation. She did say that she had more oily skin and she noticed that her skin was getting oilier throughout the day. Now, I have worn this foundation for an extended period of time. I haven't worn it necessarily for, let's say, like 8 hours or 9 hours, 10 hours, things like that. I've worn it for 4 or 5 hours, fine. I haven't worn it maybe for such a long time like she has done. So I can see why someone with oily skin, if they wear this like for 8 hours, wouldn't like it because it's very glowy. But I do think that if you have oily skin, you would probably go for a more matte type of foundation. I'm not sure why you would typically go for this one because it kind of says it on its own that it's a satin finish. So I don't think that this would be the foundation that you would go for anyways if you have super oily skin. So I was a little bit confused by that. I was kind of like, well, I mean, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure at that point. Also, I think that the finish of the foundation is not so extremely glowy that you cannot combat that if you have oily skin, maybe like a regular type of oily skin or like combination skin. You probably just have to use a mattifying primer before and a mattifying powder after. So I think that with that, you will have a foolproof kind of look. I mean, I don't really see that this foundation is that glowy to the fact where you cannot absolutely use this at all if you have oily skin. You can definitely use it if you like that kind of more skin-like finish and kind of like a natural glow to the skin. I don't know. I just don't think that that was an accurate representation of the foundation. I personally think that person was just kind of trying to look for bad things in the product and didn't really know what to expect. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. I didn't have that kind of issue with this. I do think that it's a better foundation if you have more normal skin. If you have dry skin, you might really like this foundation as well because of the finish of it. It's a really nice natural finish. I did put on some highlight on, but you can see that it still looks really nice and a natural kind of finish. So it's a very nice finish. That's one thing that I really loved about this foundation and why I might buy more colors of this to go into my kit is because I love the finish of the foundation. So I kind of, with my kind of way of doing makeup professionally, I look for things that look even and what gives some coverage to the skin or can easily build up to give you a nice coverage, but it doesn't look heavy. That's what I typically look for in a foundation. I don't want products to look heavy. I don't want products to look cakey. I don't want products to look matte. I don't want products to look overly glowy either and don't have any coverage. I want it to have a good, nice base coverage, buildable coverage with that still looks skin-like, because from there I can work with it. When a foundation has like a really neutral baseline, I can work around that. You know, if they have more oily skin, I put on an oil absorbing primer, pore minimizing primer, and a mattifying powder on top. So that's why I think that this foundation is really great if you're looking for something extremely versatile, because you can go either way. You can go extremely matte, you can go extremely glowy, whatever it is that you're looking for, this product can do it, which is why that's one of the main things that I love about this product, is that you can work so well with it and do whatever it is that you want. I've done looks that are more matte with this foundation. I've done looks that are more glowy. It's really just how you play with it. So that's a plus for me. I love that about this foundation, and I love the finish that it gives. Sometimes what I'll do is when I buy a foundation, I'll look at it in this mirror that's kind of like a magnifying mirror, and I'll look and see how it's sitting in my pores. And that's bad, because let's be honest, makeup is gonna look like makeup when it's sitting on the skin. So I'll do that with my regular whatever other foundation I have, and I'll look at it and I'll say, wow, that looks like I have makeup in my pores. But this one looks, when I look at it up close, it looks like makeup, but so extremely soft and kind of blurring on the skin when I look at it up close, which is another plus for me with this foundation is that on the skin, it just looks like it sinks in and kind of just like disperses, and it looks very even. So I really like this foundation personally. I would repurchase it and purchase more colors of it. One thing that I wanted to mention is the kind of brush that you use with this. So this is the reason why I said earlier that I want to say that it's easy for people that don't have a lot of experience. You know, me personally, having, you know, I'm in the makeup industry, I'm a professional makeup artist, so I know what things and what products work with what brushes work with what, but that's not the case for every single person out there, especially maybe you watching my videos. You're probably not the kind of person that, you know, has a ton of different brushes or a ton of different primers or a ton of different items to use with this. So that's why I feel like it's not exactly easy for everyone to use. It's not like if you're less experienced, you will use this foundation fine, because I think that it does have a little learning curve to it. It's not super easy at the first round to go. That's why I also said earlier that the first time I used it, I didn't like it because it has a little learning curve to it. It's definitely one thing that you have to try out with different kinds of brushes. Since this product has a liquid base, a liquid kind of consistency, if you use a stippling brush with this, you're gonna hate it. Just pointing it out, you're gonna hate it. You're gonna be blending for 5 years because it's never going to blend onto the skin. You're gonna notice streakiness. You're gonna notice all of that just because of the consistency of the foundation. So do not use a stippling brush with this. I also used a beauty sponge with this, and I also don't like it with this product. It's too liquidy of a formula for you to use a stippling brush or a sponge. With the sponge, it absorbs the product immediately. It's so thin and liquidy that you're gonna waste a ton of product just with the absorption of this. And then you barely get any coverage. It disperses the product a little bit funky. And anyways, you're gonna notice streaking. So I personally don't like the sponge for this as well. I just think that if you want to get the best coverage and the easiest blend, a dense buffing brush is your best bet with this. Because of the consistency of it, this brush just kind of like pats it into the skin and also goes blending it very nicely. Whereas this absorbs it, the stippling brush will just cause streaks. So this is the best kind of brush for this product. So, you know, if you have a kind of brush like this and you want to use this foundation, then go for it. But if you have a stippling brush or a sponge, don't use that. I personally don't like it that much. You could maybe use the sponge like in any small areas that you want to reach, and you put some foundation on your palette, and then you want to touch up maybe like your nose area, chin area. But to be honest, I don't think that the sponge is a very good product or a good tool to use with this product. It's just not my favorite kind of application because of the consistency of this. So that's why I say the foundation has kind of like a learning curve. I tried it with other primers and it's fine. I don't think that you need a primer at all with this, which is one thing that I like about this foundation, is that it stands good on its own. So I just use the Fix Plus just for glow and hydration sake, but you don't really need any of that with this foundation. So it's kind of, you know, it's not super idiot proof, I would say, because you have to try out with different kinds of brushes and things like that. That was an experience that I had when I used this foundation. At first, I didn't like the streakiness. And even sometimes with this brush, you might notice a streak, but, you know, a pro tip, if you notice the streakiness, you just start buffing and you'll get rid of that streakiness. The streakiness will start to happen if you use like this kind of motion, you know, brushing downwards, using long strokes. You'll start noticing the streakiness, but if you use a tapping motion with this kind of brush, you won't notice any streaking whatsoever. So that's just a pro tip from me with this. You do have to set this foundation because the finish of it is a natural glow, but it does stay pretty tacky on the skin. So it is a foundation that you have to set with a light powder. You don't have to use a ton of powder. I actually don't like the look of a ton of powder. So I use a really light wash of powder. I maybe get my sponge and dip it into my face powder and then just pat it in the areas where I get oily, and then go in with a light hand with a brush on the rest of my face, and I'm good to go. It does have a tacky feeling to it, so you do have to set it. It's not something that you can just wing, wham, bam, walk out the door and not set it. You do have to set it, because when you touch it, you will feel the tackiness, and then you might experience some product being removed. So that's one thing. But to be honest, if you set it, then you're good to go. It's not going to move. It's not going to budge.